Hi there BookTube, it's Eleanor here, and today I get to talk about another 5-star read. Yes, they're coming in now, and this one was kind of no surprise. From starting the book I knew that it was going to be a 5-star read. I could just tell. I think sometimes you can just tell. It's one that I'm going to find quite difficult to talk about, just because it's such a hot topic and a debate topic, but I think it's really important that we're talking about these things. It's called Death at Seaworld and it's by David Kirkby. This was recommended to me by someone in my real life who said that I should read it because I'd watched Blackfish a number of times, and it led me to feel quite uncomfortable about the idea of orcas and dolphins kept in these sort of pleasure parks like Seaworld. And more specifically, it came to light with me this Christmas when we went to Tenerife, and there is a park in Tenerife called Lora Park which keeps killer whales in captivity, and ultimately that and another reason, distance, meant that we didn't end up going there, and I am pleased that we didn't now. So I want to talk to you about this book. So this book is non-fiction, as you may have gathered, and it looks to explore the darker side of Seaworld and keeping killer whales in captivity. The book focuses around a number of different people. One of those is Naomi Rose. She is a marine biologist and an animal advocate for the Humane Society of the US, and we follow her life from sort of infancy, really, from a really young age, at what inspired her to go into science and what led her to ultimately becoming an advocate at the Humane Society of the US. And I thought that was a really interesting way of showing her credentials in this subject and giving some weight to the information and the ideas and the facts that she tells us. And ultimately Naomi, through her work with HSUS, has been fighting this sort of 2-decade battle, really, with the PR you know, multi-billion dollar company Seaworld, who use PR to spin the facts and change things. And really, I think in some ways, I think it's fair in saying, in my opinion, twist and distort the facts in order to garner public, you know, positive PR. All this very tragically comes to a head, this sort of battle with Seaworld about their orcas in captivity in 2010, when a trainer, Dawn Branchow, was very tragically killed by orca Tilikum. This was heavily publicised at the time in the media, and I very slightly remember, but not being in the US, it might not have been something that hit my radar quite so much, but it was interesting to see how this tragedy has really added fire and weight to the argument that orcas shouldn't be kept in captivity, and also that trainers should not be getting into the water with these creatures. It's just not it's not right for the trainers, it's not safe, and you know, it's not right for the orcas. Throughout the book we are also following former Seaworld trainers who now are advocates for orcas not being held in captivity, and in fact many believe that they should be retired to these sort of sea pens. I think the big debate that has come out of this book is that Seaworld and other places that keep orcas in captivity say that because of the way they've been kept, and actually most of them now are born in captivity, that it's not a feasible thing for them to return to the wild completely. They wouldn't fare very well and they wouldn't last. And I think a lot of people say that they don't necessarily agree with that, or if they do agree with that, that they believe that they would be better off in these sea pens, which are sort of netted off areas in the sea. They're in sort of seawater, they've got a much bigger space to explore, and yet they've still got people there that can feed them if they, you know, they're not able to feed themselves, because obviously that's what they're used to, and having that sort of human interaction. But they believe that that's a more humane way of them living out the rest of their lives. So after this tragedy in 2010, this sort of spurred on this really highly publicised OSHA case against Seaworld, which looks to end trainers getting into the water with orcas. Now this book was published in 2012, so obviously things have moved forward since then, and having sort of looked into it a bit more since reading the book, it's believed now that San Diego has actually stopped trainers getting into the water, and they have stopped their breeding program, and it's looking that Orlando and San Jose Seaworld will no longer have trainers in the water from the end of 2019. So initially I was attracted to this book, as I say, from watching Blackfish a number of times, and then this recommendation from a friend, and I thought I'm going to try this. And I just felt a bit icky about the idea of orcas in captivity, and we are planning on going to Disney World next year and taking our, she'll then be 7-year-old, and I just didn't feel right about visiting Seaworld while we're there, and we won't be visiting Seaworld, especially after reading this book, but we had sort of made the decision anyway. But we won't be visiting Seaworld because I just don't feel like after reading this book it's somewhere that I want to spend my money. I feel like the author did a really good job of giving us views from all sides of the story on this. And yes, I do agree with critics that say that it's heavily biased towards the anti-captivity angle, but as it says in the beginning, in the foreword by the author, Seaworld and other pro-captivity camps were asked to contribute to this, and they refused. So, you know, without that information and without those people stepping up and giving those pro-captivity slants, that couldn't go in the book anyway. One thing that I think I really loved about this is that every few pages I was pausing, stopping, thinking, allowing it to digest. I couldn't read more than about 20 pages a day because I just had so much to think about from those 20 pages, and I wanted to go off and I wanted to Google videos, and I wanted to watch videos, and I wanted to search the things that were being talked about, and I think that really added to this whole round experience of reading this, and it's something that I really love when a non-fiction makes you do that. I want to read you a little bit about one of the things that I read about which truly shocked me. You hear about you know, the highly publicised deaths of trainers and you know, highly publicised accidents and incidents that have occurred, but the sheer amount of incidents that have been unreported and haven't been heard about until now is just shocking. This one, which was documented, but I had no idea. It says the first fully documented act of aggression by a Seaworld orca happened in San Diego on April 20th, 1971. The original Shamu, just 4 months before she died, was in a publicity stunt gone terribly wrong. A young secretary, this is a secretary, this isn't a trained trainer, this isn't anyone with any experience, this is a secretary from Seaworld named Annette had been convinced by Seaworld's PR department to put on a bikini, so she's not even dressed in suitable wetsuit, and ride around on the back of Shamu for local newspapers and television stations. If you watch, there is interviews with Annette, and also there is some video footage. And I am truly disgusted, especially as this particular orca had been aggressive towards someone before this incident, so they knew that this orca wasn't necessarily safe. It says the tank was small, its diameter perhaps 3 times wider than Shamu was long. That is ridiculously small. Akin to a backyard above ground pool. The 19-year-old gingerly climbed on the edge of the pool onto the back of the whale, who began to slowly move around the perimeter. The young woman reached behind with her arm to grab hold of Shamu's dorsal fin. As they swam around in tight circles, Annette began to enjoy the ride. Shamu soon grew uneasy and began thrashing around violently, churning the water into 4-foot chop. She shook off Annette, who struggled to tread the churning salt water. Then Shamu grabbed her legs. Annette was inside the whale's mouth, sitting on the bottom row of teeth with the top row biting down on her. She grabbed Shamu's rostrum for balance and screamed for help as the orca spun furiously around the tiny tank. When rescue divers tried to enter the water, Shamu blocked them and responded by biting down harder on Annette's legs. Every so often she headed for the bottom, bringing the terrified secretary underwater with her. Annette thought she was going to drown. The ordeal, recorded in horrific detail by the news crews, now appears on YouTube, capturing the screams and look of pure terror on Annette's face as Shamu brutally assaulted her. Workers hoisted a pole over the water and pulled Annette to the edge. She was panting and out of breath, but she grabbed the wall and held it with the little strength she had left. It looked as if she was going to make it out. But Shamu had other plans. The whale surged back from underneath the water and clamped down once again on Annette's bloody thigh. She shrieked in fear. Eventually, rescuers pried Shamu's jaws open with a pole to free the legs and yanked Annette from the tank. The lacerations and puncture wounds that covered Annette from the waist down required 200 stitches. There was a lot of blood, but there was no pain. The water was cold and I was in shock for quite a while, Annette said later. Only after the attack did she learn that Shamu had never been ridden by a female before, and never anyone not in a wetsuit. It makes me quite emotional just reading that, if I'm honest. That poor woman with pressure from her boss to do something, from her bosses from Seaworld, and I just think that is horrific, quite frankly, and total negligence on Seaworld's part. So I mentioned previously before about going to Tenerife in last Christmas and not going to the Lura Park. We made the decision not to go. One, because of the distance, really. It was quite a long way away and our daughter suffers from car sickness, but also because of this uneasy feeling we felt about these orcas. And I'm really pleased I did. There was a section in the book talking about how the orcas that are in captivity in Lura Park are actually ones that have been transferred from Seaworld. They were transferred very young, and one of them actually did kill a trainer there. There is interviews and documentation of this online, and this poor man lost his life due to lack of training, lack of information, and I feel that Seaworld, having been the ones that loaned these whales out to Lura Park, didn't do their due diligence and let trainers know and properly equip them, and the trainers should never have been in the water with them. I think the biggest thing that came out of this, hearing from previous trainers, was how kept in the dark the trainers are about different things. New trainers coming in aren't informed about all of the instances. There is a lot of changing of stories, making them seem a lot less than they were, and I feel like, you know, there isn't this big transparency there, so people coming in, and new trainers especially, are unaware of the situation, unaware of what they're going into, and I just think that is horrific on the part of Seaworld. So again, not just the facts being distorted for trainers coming in, but also I think something that doesn't sit right with me is that Seaworld uses the facts about orcas, and they are facts, and uses those facts and just pulls the bits that work for what they want to say, especially things like saying about how long orcas live in captivity compared to the wild. They have pulled statistics from a small part, and particularly from a year where there was a decline in wild orcas anyway due to a massive salmon shortage. They've pulled the information from that 1 year, which then does show what they say, but that the lifespan is similar to that in the wild, but however that is truly misleading people when they say that, so I find that really damaging. I don't like the way that they talk about the dorsal fin bending over and how that is normal in the wild as well. It's not. I think they said in the book that they believe that the dorsal fin bends over because of the shallowness of the pools, and that orcas in the wild would dive down deeper. Don't quote me on that one, but I think that's what they were saying. So that is not true either. And something that really doesn't sit well is this breeding program. And in fact, someone very rightly you know, states in the book, it's not really, or it wasn't really, a breeding program. It was an inbreeding program. These whales are all related in some way, and they were forced to give birth much younger than they would in the wild. They were taken away from their mothers much younger. I mean, some of these whales would live with their mothers their whole life. They were taken away. It was obvious they were in distress because of the whale calls that were going out when they were separated, when the calves were sent off to other parks. And just personally, that really doesn't sit well with me at all. And the thing that I enjoyed learning about was about orcas in the wild. We learned that there's two main different types of orcas, and they are very you know, they're like a family. And if you are, you know, pulled out of your family and sent to Africa, you know, if I was pulled out of my family as a baby, you know, a tiny baby, sent to Africa to live with a family, A, I wouldn't know their language, so I wouldn't be able to talk to them. B, I wouldn't have any of the same sort of cultural norms, and it would take me a long time to learn those, and it just wouldn't feel right. And they just aren't made to live like that. And I feel quite strongly about this now, and I will be reading more on this. In fact, I've picked up another book that someone has recommended to me, which I will be picking up and reading next, and that is Beneath the Surface, Killer Whales, Seaworld and the Truth Beyond Blackfish by John Hargrove, who was a former senior orca trainer at Seaworld. So I believe this gives his view of what it was like. It says a first-hand account of the lives of captive killer whales by one of the most experienced orca trainers to emerge from Seaworld and a star of the hugely popular documentary Blackfish. This was a Good Reads Choice 2015 winner, and it was published in 2015, and so it moves us a little bit further forward from the 2012 publication that I've just read, and it gives us a wholly different perspective, so I'm looking forward to adding to my knowledge by reading that one. Yeah. This book I really enjoyed. In terms of its reading style, it reads a little bit like a novel. It's very nice to read. The science and the information is there, but it's not too heavy, and I felt like it was explained really well so that someone like me who's perhaps not scientifically minded could understand it. And I think the good sign of a non-fiction book is if it makes you think, talk and debate about the subject, and if it makes you want to go and research more and find out more. I think that can only be a good thing. It can only add to the conversation and add to the debate. I'd be really interested if any of you have read these. If you are pro or anti Captivity, I'd be interested to hearing your thoughts. If you can recommend any further books that are that would be interesting for me to read about this subject, I would be really interested. And this was a 5-star for me. How could it not be? It was informative, it was interesting, although it filled me with sickness and an uneasy feeling. I definitely feel like it was a worthy read and definitely worthy of 5 stars. So if you're interested in the subject, I definitely recommend it as one to read. Anyway, that is it from me, and I look forward to reading your comments and having a chat to you and speaking to you soon. Bye for now, BookTube.